How you guys doing today? It's Anthony Ganji. Welcome to another episode of Tier Talk. Guys, great discussion today. We're going to talk about the us first them mentality and corrections and basically lessons learned from the prison strike that happened in New York. There's a lot here to learn, and I want to put it out there in a way that's balanced. I'm not here to choose sides. That's why it took me a while to discuss this topic. I want to look for long-term resolutions, and that comes from building trust, working together, and not from division. And I think this is a great way to do it. It took me about 2 weeks to put this together. And after I do this, I'll send this video out to a few people on the panel and we'll discuss it more in depth. But there's a lot here, so bear with me. So again, we're going to talk about the us versus them mentality and corrections. And this is lessons learned from the New York prison strike. The New York prison strike has exposed a deep and long-standing issue in corrections, the us versus them mentality between frontline correctional officers and management. The divide isn't just an inconvenience. It's a fundamental breakdown in trust, communication, and accountability that impacts safety, morale, and overall effectiveness inside correctional facilities. When I was asked to cover this topic, I hesitated, not because the issue isn't important, but because I felt like the conversation was already framed as a battle, one where you're expected to pick a side rather than engage in a productive discussion. And that's exactly the problem. This isn't about choosing sides. It's about fixing a broken system. Officers and administrators both have valid concerns, but until there's shared accountability and a commitment to real solutions, this divide will continue to grow, leading to more strikes, more resignations, and ultimately a weaker correction system. So how do we get here? And more importantly, how do we fix it? So where does the us versus them mentality come from? The us versus them mentality is deeply ingrained in many correctional facilities. It develops over time as frustrations build, policies feel one-sided, and communication breaks down. When one side believes the other is actively working against them, distrust spreads like wildfire. The New York prison strike serves as a powerful example of what happens when this divide reaches a boiling point. Officers walked off the job, citing unsafe working conditions, lack of communication, and policies that, in their view, placed their lives at risk. Management, in turn, struggled to respond, and the situation quickly became a battle rather than a discussion. So we got lack of trust, which is the foundation of dysfunction. Key insight: without trust, officers assume management disregards their safety, and management assumes officers are resisting change out of stubbornness rather than necessity. Trust is the foundation of any functional team. Without trust, everything collapses. Patrick Lencioni, in The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, explains that when trust is missing, there's no healthy conflict. People stop sharing honest opinions or concerns. Without conflict, there is no commitment. Officers feel their voices don't matter, so they disengage. Without commitment, there is no accountability. Officers and leadership start blaming each other instead of fixing problems. And without accountability, there are failed outcomes. Facilities become more dangerous, officers burn out, and morale plummets. New York example: officers felt like the Halt Solitary Confinement Act compromised their safety by restricting their ability to manage violent inmates. They didn't trust management to prioritize their well-being, which escalated tension. The lack of trust isn't one-sided. Management often feels that officers are resistant to reform, unwilling to adapt, or actively undermining new policies. These assumptions, fueled by a lack of communication, creates a vicious cycle of blame where neither side takes step towards a solution. And that's the lack of trust, the foundation of dysfunction. Now we have poor communication creates assumption and animosity. So the key insight here is, in the absence of clear communication, people fill in the blanks with their own assumptions, usually negative ones. Lack of communication is one of the biggest drivers of division between officers and leadership. When communication breaks down, assumptions replace facts. Officers assume management doesn't care. Management assumes officers are resisting change. Animosity builds. Instead of working together, both sides dig in, making collaborative or collaboration impossible. And policy confusion leads to fear. If leadership doesn't explain changes clearly, officers feel blindsided and abandoned. The New York example, there's many officers on strike expressed frustration that they were not included in policy discussions that directly affected their safety. Leadership failed to properly communicate why certain reforms were being implemented, leading to widespread distrust and resistance. The result? Policies that might have been more effective with officer input instead became another point of contention. I want to get to the role of shared accountability. Key insight here is change works best when both sides take ownership of their role in the problem and the solution. On the biggest obstacle, or one of the biggest obstacles to progress in corrections, is the blame game. Officers blame management for unsafe conditions, while management blames officers for resisting change. But real solutions required shared accountability. Frontline officers must acknowledge that rehabilitation plays a role in public safety. If inmates leave prisons worse than when they entered, officers will deal with them again. Management must recognize that officers' safety cannot be sacrificed in the name of reform. A rehabilitative approach cannot exist in an environment where officers feel unsafe. Both sides must work together to implement policies that enhance security while creating better outcomes for inmates. Instead of winning an argument, discussion should focus on creating sustainable solutions that benefit both sides and inmates. Shared accountability doesn't mean agreeing on everything. It means working together despite disagreements to ensure that policies are fair, effective, and enforceable. So we're not looking for agreement, but we need to be aligned. The role of unions and advocacy groups. Key insight: unions can be a powerful tool for officers, but if misaligned, they can also deepen the divide. Unions are meant to protect officers' rights and advocate for better working conditions, but when tensions rise between unions and leadership, negotiations can turn into standoffs instead of solutions. Some officers feel unions escalate conflicts rather than push for meaningful improvements. Others see unions as their only line of defense against policies that put them at risk. And strategic collaboration between unions and administration could achieve long-term improvement rather than short-term fights. In some cases, unions and management become locked in opposition, making it nearly impossible to create productive policy changes. While unions fight for officers' rights, they must also be willing to engage in problem solving rather than just resistance. The financial impact of the strikes and administrative decisions. So the financial impact of the strike and administrative decisions. Key insight: a broken system costs everyone: officers, management, taxpayers, and the public. Strikes and work stoppages don't just disrupt operations, they come with huge financial consequences. State spends millions covering overtime, hiring temporary replacements, and legal costs resulting from labor disputes. High turnover due to bad conditions result in expensive recruitment and training cycles. Administrative mismanagement and short-sighted policies can create long-term financial instability, forcing correctional systems into reactive spending rather than proactive investment. Better workforce management, retention efforts, and collaborative policymaking could prevent these financial hits. The cost of poor working conditions and failed reforms often outweigh the cost of implementing smarter, well-structured solutions. Ultimately, when corrections is dysfunctional, taxpayers pay the price. Shared accountability between unions, frontline officers, and management is the only way to create a financially sustainable correction system. Balance and rehabilitation with safety and security, a compromised approach. Key insight: people don't fear change itself. What they fear is the suddenness of change and what they have to let go of. One of the most contentious issues in modern corrections is finding the right balance between rehabilitation and security. Both are necessary, but when one side dominates the discussion, the entire system suffers. The risk of extremes. If security is prioritized at the expense of rehabilitation, facilities become punitive warehouses where inmates serve time without personal growth, leading to high recidivism rates. If rehabilitation is prioritized at the expense of security, officers lose the necessary tools to maintain order, leading to dangerous working conditions and increased violence. New York example: the HALT Act, designed to reduce solitary confinement, was seen by some as an overcorrection, limiting officers' ability to discipline violent offenders effectively. Officers warned that inmate assaults increased as a result, leading to even more workplace dangers. So a middle ground solution. Security and rehabilitation must work together. Safety measures should not be eliminated in the name of reform, but reform should not be dismissed because of fear. Policy changes must be gradual and inclusive. Sudden sweeping changes cause instability and resistance. And officers must be part of the policy-making process. When those enforcing the rules have a say, policies become more realistic and effective. What other jurisdictions are doing right? Some correctional systems have successfully navigated these issues with innovative approaches. I found out that in Washington State, they hold monthly officer management meetings to improve communication and discuss policy changes. Canada, well, they require new supervisors to shadow frontline staff to build an understanding and prevent administrative detachment. And Norway focuses on human-centered rehabilitation training to help officers manage inmates more effectively while maintaining security. These approaches have resulted in better morale, stronger relationships between staff and leadership, and safer correctional environments. But again, they don't sit on extremes. It's all about a balance, because Norway is very extreme in their practice for rehabilitation. So with that said, there should still be another approach for a revisit where how safety and security and rehabilitation can be applied in our worlds together as a collaborative effort, not a cooperative effort, a collaborative effort, because it relates to the needs as a house as a whole. So these approaches have resulted in better morale, stronger relationships between staff and leadership, and safer correctional environments. So now let's discuss a vision for the future of corrections, a system that works for everyone. The current state of corrections is unsustainable. The us versus them mentality between frontline officers and management has created a cycle of conflict, one that leads to strikes, resignations, and policies that neither side fully support. If corrections is going to move forward, the system must evolve in a way that prioritizes safety, rehabilitation, and cooperation without sacrificing the well-being of officers or the effectiveness of institutions. But what does a functional, balanced correctional system actually look like? Well, for one, we need a system where officers feel safe and supported. That's number one. Safety is the foundation of any correctional facility. Officers should never feel like their own security is being sacrificed for political or administrative reasons. New policies should enforce security while still allowing for rehabilitation efforts, rather than forcing officers to choose between enforcing rules and keeping their jobs. Correctional officers should have the necessary tools, training, and staffing levels to effectively manage inmate populations without fear of being put in harm's way due to policy restrictions. So you want a system where officers don't feel abandoned by leadership and where policies prioritize both their safety and professional expertise. We also need a system where leadership and officers work together, not against each other. Leaders should not govern correctional facilities from a distance. The best policies come from those who understand the realities of the job, which means officers must be involved in decision-making. Instead of policies being dictated from the top down, reforms should be discussed with frontline staff before being implemented, ensuring they are practical and enforceable. Union and management relations should be focused on problem solving, not power struggles. Both sides should have regular, structured collaboration meetings to address concerns before they escalate. So the future vision here would be a system where frontline staff and leadership operate as a team and not as opposing forces locked in constant conflict. We also need a balanced approach to rehabilitation and security. The debate between rehabilitation versus security should not be a battle of extremes. Both are necessary for a correctional system that actually works. Security must never be compromised in the name of reform, but rehabilitation should also be recognized as a tool for long-term public safety. Policies should be gradual, data-driven, and officer-supported, not radical changes that disrupt facility stability overnight. And the future vision here is a system where rehabilitation and security are not in conflict, but work together to create safer environments for officers and better outcomes for inmates. We also need a profession that is respected, well-trained, and well-staffed. Correctional officers should be seen as professionals, not as disposable, undertrained workers. Ongoing training, mental health resources, and leadership development opportunities should be standard across the field, and recruitment and retention strategies should focus on long-term career growth, not just filling vacancies caused by burnout. So what we have for a vision here is a system where correctional officers are given the same level of respect, training, and career support as other law enforcement professionals. And then we need a financially sustainable correction system. The current reactionary approach to corrections, where leadership only makes changes after crisis strikes, is costly and ineffective. Instead of spending millions on lawsuits, overtime, and emergency staffing, funding should be directed towards staff retention, safety measures, and facility improvement. States and correctional agencies should be advocating for more funding together instead of fighting each other over limited resources. And what's the future vision here? A system where corrections is funded proactively, not reactively, ensuring both officers and inmates have the resources needed for a safer and more effective environment. I think ultimately, when it comes to the New York prison strike, the big question is, will this be another missed opportunity or a turning point? Can we learn from it? So the New York prison strike has exposed cracks in the system that can no longer be ignored. But will this wake-up call lead to meaningful change, or will the same cycles of conflict, strikes, and policy failures continue? The future of corrections doesn't have to be defined by dysfunction. If officers, management, and unions commit to shared accountability, better communication, and practical, balanced reform, we can create a system that actually works for staff, for inmates, and for the public safety as a whole. The choice is simple. Keep fighting the same battles with no progress, or work together to finally build something better. Now, I knew there was going to be rebuttals, so I have a few. So one rebuttal is management doesn't care about officer safety. So the frontline officer's perspective is, we've been saying for years that policies are making our jobs more dangerous, and management just keeps pushing these changes through without listening. They don't care if we get hurt. They care about public perception. So management's response: we do care about officer safety, but we also have to consider legal and public pressure for reform. Balancing security and rehabilitation isn't easy, and we have to answer to policymakers and advocacy groups. We're not trying to make the job harder. We're trying to navigate a complex system. How to address it? Solution: more officers' input on policy changes. Before major reforms are implemented, officers should be consulted and involved in discussions to identify real safety concerns and potential unintended consequences. Solution: data-driven decision-making. If a policy is designed to improve conditions but results in higher officer assaults, leadership should be willing to adjust the policy based on data and officer feedback. Another rebuttal: officers just don't want to change. So management's perspective: every time we try to introduce reforms, there's pushback from officers. They don't want to change even when change is necessary. They act like any policy that isn't old school is a direct attack on them. Frontline officers' response: we're not against change. We just want change that makes sense. The problem is that policies are being implemented without taking into account what actually happens inside the facility. We're the ones who have to enforce these policies, and when they don't work, we're the ones who pay the price. How to address it? Solution: pilot programs for policy reforms. Instead of forcing immediate system-wide changes, test reforms in small-scale pilot programs and gather officers' feedback before full implementation. Solution: better communication from leadership. Officers should not hear about policy changes last or be left to figure them out on their own. Leadership should communicate the why behind changes and provide training to help officers adjust. Got another rebuttal: unions are just there to fight management. Management's perspective: unions don't want solutions. They just want to fight every policy change and make everything a battle. They aren't working towards real improvements. They just want to flex their power. Union and officers' response: the union is the only thing standing between us and policies that make our jobs harder and more dangerous. Without them, we have no leverage to push back against bad policies. If management actually listened to us, we wouldn't need the union to fight so hard. How to address it? Solution: union management collaboration committees. Instead of waiting for conflicts to escalate, unions and management should have ongoing collaboration meetings to discuss concerns before they turn to full-scale disputes. Solution: transparency and union-led discussions. Unions should clearly communicate their priorities to both officers and leadership so that negotiations focus on real actionable solutions rather than just opposition. Another rebuttal: the strike shows that officers are just trying to win a power struggle. Management and public perception: the strike isn't about safety. It's about officers wanting to show they have power over management. If they really cared about improving the system, they wouldn't walk off the job. Officers' response: we're not walking out because we want to. We're walking out because we're exhausted at every other option. Striking isn't about power. It's about survival. We've missed concerns. Sorry. We've raised concerns for years and nothing has changed. What other choice do we have? How to address it? Solution: create a more effective grievance process. Strikes often happen because officers feel unheard. A structured, transparent, and enforceable grievance process with real consequences for neglecting officers' concerns could prevent escalation. Solution: acknowledging the strikes are a symptom, not the problem. Instead of blaming officers for striking, leadership should ask what led to the strike in the first place and work towards preventing future breakdowns in communication. Another one: management is only focused on saving money. Frontline officer perspective: they don't care about safety or fairness, they just care about budget cuts. They're cutting staff, limiting overtime, and taking away tools we need, all to save money at our expense. Management response: budget constraints are a reality, and we have to work within them. We're not cutting resources to punish officers. We're trying to keep the entire system running efficiently with the funding we have. How to address it? Solution: financial transparency between officers and leadership. If budget cuts must happen, leadership should explain why and involve officers in discussions on where funds can be redirected to lessen the impact on safety. Solution: advocate for more corrections funding as a unified front. Instead of fighting internally over resources, officers and leadership should work together to advocate for more state and federal funding for corrections. So what's the takeaway? Final takeaway: challenges and the path forward. These rebuttals highlight the deep frustrations and misunderstanding on both sides. The challenge isn't that one side is right and the other is wrong. It's that both sides are operating from a place of distrust, miscommunication, and competing priorities. To break the cycle, both frontline officers and management must shift the focus from winning arguments to finding real solutions. Acknowledge that past mistakes have damaged trust and work to rebuild it. Recognize that officers and leadership both play a role in fixing the system, and stop fighting over power and start collaborating towards a safer, more functional correctional system. If both sides remain entrenched in their position, the same problems will keep repeating, leading to more strikes, more resignations, and a weaker system overall. But if correction leaders and officers can find common ground, the correction system doesn't have to remain broken. The question now is, are both sides willing to step up and out of their corners and meet in the middle? So just my final thoughts, and this is basically moving beyond the divide, a call to action. The us versus them mentality has plagued corrections for too long. It's a false division, one that keeps frontline officers and management locked in conflict rather than working towards meaningful solutions. But this divide is not just an internal issue. It affects the safety of officers, the effectiveness of correctional institutions, and ultimately the well-being of society as a whole. If this divide isn't addressed, the consequences will continue to ripple through the system. More strikes, labor disputes will persist, straining facilities and leaving shifts dangerously understaffed. More resignations, talented, experienced officers will continue to leave, increasing turnover and further weakening an already struggling workforce. More dangerous working conditions, officers and staff will be left ill-equipped and unsupported, leading to higher rates of assaults, burnouts, and workplace trauma, and more financial waste. Reactive policies, legal battles, and emergency staffing will continue to drain taxpayer dollars, funds that could have been used for sustainable long-term solutions. But here's the real question. Will New York crisis serve as a warning or a turning point? The answer depends on whether both sides are willing to step up and break the cycle. This can't be another temporary fix, another Band-Aid policy that simply postpones the inevitable. Real lasting change will require commitment to trust and transparency. Both sides must stop assuming the worst of each other and start engaging in meaningful dialogue. A focus on collaboration over conflict. Officers and leadership need to stop fighting each other and start working together to create workable, sustainable policies. A shift from reactive to proactive leadership. Instead of waiting for crises to force change, correctional leadership must proactively involve officers in discussions before policies are implemented. And a shared vision for the future of corrections, one that prioritizes safety, ensures officers have the resources they need, and keeps rehabilitation efforts grounded in reality. Correctional officers are the backbone of this system, and leadership must acknowledge their voices, concerns, and expertise from the front line. At the same time, officers must also recognize that leadership is under pressure to evolve corrections in response to political, societal, and legal challenges. The only way forward is shared accountability. The only way corrections will improve is if both sides commit to solving problems together. Because if the correction system continues to be defined by division rather than progress, everyone loses. So it's time to ask again, Are both sides willing to take responsibility, bridge the gap, and build something better? Because if not, the next crisis isn't a matter of if, it's a matter of when. All right, so hopefully this covers a lot. I would like to explore this whole dialogue with Russ and Joe in the future, but I just wanted to get out there something just so people know I did pay attention to it. I just wanted to make sure I approached it in a manner that was balanced. I'm not here to choose sides. I believe in the profession as a whole, and it comes with us working together. We need each other more now than ever. So why find reasons to divide? This isn't about win or loss. It's about resolution. And resolution comes through compromise and collaboration. All right, guys, stay safe.